What's up, everyone? Tera Roberts here with FantasyPros, bringing you my players to cut in Week 7. Before I get into the list, if you want a chance to win a signed Christian Kirk Jacksonville Jaguars jersey courtesy of bettingpros.com, your place to start betting smarter and not harder, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize. Now let's go ahead and dive right in with players to cut in deep leagues of 12 teams or more. First up, Samaje Perine. It's Week 7, and it's time we accept Samaje Perine's fantasy value is painfully low. Heading into the season, Perine was a hot commodity in most fantasy drafts. It feels weird to say it now, but he was one of the most frequent sleeper picks during draft season. The appeal with Perine was the potential workload limitation for Javonte Williams post-ACL tear. The reasoning was logical. Williams has yet to see over 50% of snaps, and his highest touches actually came in Week 1 with 13 carries and 4 receptions. But there's one problem here: Jaleel McLaughlin. Javonte has had the most carries on the season for any Denver running back with 48. But the back with the second most carries is McLaughlin. And to make matters worse, McLaughlin isn't just getting more carries, he's been far more productive. Perine has averaged just 3.7 yards per carry. McLaughlin has averaged 6.6 yards per carry. But the most painful statistics finally popped in Week 6: snap count. Perine had at least maintained a higher snap count, but he was finally outsnapped by both Williams and McLaughlin, leaving Perine with very little opportunity. 0 carries and just a couple of receptions. The writing is on the wall here, and Perine likely won't have a productive role within this Denver offense moving forward. Next up, Jahan Dotson. Jahan Dotson was on my players to cut list in shallow leagues last week, and this week he's getting a promotion. Except getting promoted on this list is never a good thing. I want nothing more for Jahan Dotson than a dramatic turnaround to the targets and touchdowns that he truly deserves. I was 100% full go on pushing Dotson this offseason as a strong draft pick, and I was very much so convinced that Sam Howell would actually be a strong sleeper pick from a fantasy perspective. I was half right. Howell's production should yield strong fantasy value from his receivers. Howell is 9th in passing yards with 1,500 yards, 5th in attempts, 5th in completions, so this isn't a case of a guy just chucking it and struggling to connect. His per-game stats are strong. The receivers should be thriving, and Dotson should be one of the top options. And it's tough to really drop Dotson because it's not as if the opportunity isn't there. Dotson's snap count is nearly exactly the same as Terry McLaurin. It's higher than Curtis Samuel. Yet between the three, Dotson has the fewest receptions and lowest yards. None of this really appears to be his fault. But therein lies the problem. If his lack of production is usage related, do we really expect Washington to make a dramatic change mid-season? This isn't a case of a young player needing time to develop. This is a case of Dotson's role just being wildly unusable from a fantasy perspective. Hunter Henry. After a hot start to the season with 2 straight games with a touchdown and over 25 fantasy points total, Hunter Henry came way back down to earth. Since Week 3, Henry has caught a total of 7 passes. Outside of those first 2 weeks, he hasn't had a single game reach double-digit fantasy points, and he has given you one performance of 0 fantasy points. And I don't blame Henry for this. His first 2 games coincided with a strong start from Mac Jones. And as we all are so painfully aware, Jones has gone from a shocking strong start to his job potentially being in serious jeopardy. The Patriots' offense as a whole is just a complete mess. And while a couple of players managed to pull through in this layup of a matchup against Vegas, for the most part, there's just no way this offense could thrive. It's possible that New England makes a change at quarterback and Henry can see an increase in production. But most likely, the offense is destined for a high draft pick and just embraces the tank, making most of the players worthless in fantasy football and Hunter Henry just a liability on your fantasy roster at this point. Tutu Atwell. No one was happier than me to see Tutu Atwell thrive earlier in the season with Cooper Kupp on IR. Tutu had been written off in his very young career as an unproductive gadget player, so it was very, very encouraging to see that he could do this given the opportunity. Actual targets on a strong snap count, and he can in fact produce at the NFL level. Tutu had 4 straight games with 8 to 9 targets. He was thriving. But Cooper Kupp returned and pushed Atwell down to the team's wide receiver 3 behind Puka Nacua. And the targets and consistency just aren't there anymore. We don't have to do a deep analysis on this one because it's pretty simple. Tutu is the third option in a receiving core dominated by Cooper Kupp and rookie breakout Puka Nacua. There's no real reason to roster Atwell. If something were to happen with Kupp or Nacua, you could grab Atwell off waivers again. Unless your league has a very deep bench, you can just move on from Atwell. Moving on to players to cut in shallow leagues, and first up, Dalvin Cook. Dalvin Cook is a repeat from last week, but I wanted to touch on him again because I debated for a while whether Cook should be on the deep list or the shallow list. Let's lay out the reasons here. Pros. Although he's not the team's RB1, he is the handcuff on a team with a very running back friendly schedule moving forward. He's not the handcuff to just any running back. He's the handcuff to a running back coming off an ACL tear, and we all know the injury risk post ACL tear. Cons. It's tough to ignore the fact that even if he gets the opportunity to be the RB1, thus far Cook has averaged 2.8 yards per carry. He has also been outsnapped by Michael Carter for the past 3 weeks, so really there is no guarantee that he'd even be productive enough to make an impact on your fantasy team if Hall were to go down with an injury. Cook is really right on the cusp of being droppable in deep leagues. If your team is below 500 and needs a win, Cook is not going to help you get there. Drop him for a player that will actually give you a chance to make an impact on your fantasy roster. If you're sitting pretty and can afford to keep him just in case, you can do so. It really just depends on how deep your bench is. Amari De Marcado. Amari De Marcado is not on the players to cut list in deep leagues for one reason. He actually outsnapped all the other running backs, and it was strange. De Marcado got 1 carry in the first quarter and had 5 yards. He didn't touch the ball again until the end of the third quarter, and then again at the end of the fourth quarter. I looked through the stats and plays over and over again, and I can't really find a rhyme or reason as to what Arizona was actually doing. And for that reason, in deep leagues, you can hold on to him if you're very thin at running back, just in case something does pan out with De Marcado. But in shallow leagues, you really have no reason to start him this week. And with actual usable players still out there on waivers right now, it's just unnecessary to hold him. Don't get stuck on him just because you spent fab to get him. DAndre Foreman. This is a contingency cut. At the time of filming this video, Rashawn Johnson has not yet cleared concussion protocol. If he doesn't clear, Foreman is the lead back in a great matchup against Vegas, and you can start him. There's absolutely no reason to cut him. Vegas has been a good matchup even for really struggling running backs, so you can roll out Foreman even though he didn't have a fantastic game last week. But if Johnson does clear concussion protocol, I do think that Johnson immediately steps into the lead back role. We've seen it time and time again with players coming off of concussions, they just go back to their normal workload. Foreman was a healthy scratch for 4 straight weeks. Johnson spent those 4 weeks active, on the field, and working to carve out a role within the Chicago's offense. If Johnson is active, I would feel very uncomfortable with starting Foreman. But given the matchup this week and next week, you could hold on to Foreman in deeper leagues, but in shallow leagues, you likely have better starting options. And finally, Jeff Wilson. This one is going to make people very uncomfortable because you aren't cutting someone that you've been holding on IR for 6 weeks, and you aren't cutting someone that you just spent fab to acquire. I know a lot of you watch both the cut list and my top 10 waiver wire video list, and you might have noticed Jeff Wilson has been suspiciously missing off of the waiver wire ad list. There's a reason for that. Devin Achane's expected return is week 11. Achane is slated to miss 3 more games plus the bye week, and then fully expected to return to be healthy enough to start in week 11. Wilson could have returned last week, but the Dolphins opted to hold him despite the fact that he was healthy and ready to play. They held him because they didn't need him. Mike McDaniel specifically said they needed the roster spot for another position. I don't think that Wilson is a priority here. I don't see Wilson making a significant cut into Raheem Mostert's workload. I just think that it maybe cuts into Savon Ahmed's workload, if that. This is a tiny window of potential usability before Achane returns. I wouldn't start him this week. Maybe you could roll him out next week against New England, but if you have to make a cut, if you have to cut somebody because you need to add a player with all of these injuries and all of these bye weeks, Wilson is an option. Thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like the video and subscribe to Fantasy Pros, and remember, if you want a chance to win a signed Christian Kirk Jacksonville Jaguars jersey courtesy of bettingpros.com, your place to start betting smarter and not harder, you need to subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel right now. Comment below on this video and that's it. We'll be announcing the winner right here on the channel, so make sure you turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize.